Looking at the first Crash Bandicoot today, it certainly looks better than most PlayStation 1 games, and it was the genesis of the Naughty Dog PlayStation love story. Unfortunately, the controls made it depressing to play through, and comes across as a novelty for collectors of PlayStation 1 games. Nobody's perfect the first time, but because it was successful enough to be in the top 10 for best-selling PlayStation games even today, Universal Interactive gave the green light for a sequel just a month after release. It's safe to say they treated Naughty Dog with a bit more respect this time. A year later, Crash Bandicoot 2 Cortex Strikes Back would be released in North America and later worldwide. The story continues right after Crash defeated Cortex to win back Torna. Cortex presumably falls to his death, but instead wakes up in a dark place next to a purple crystal. 1 year later, with the help of Dr. N. Jin, he convinces himself that they hold high levels of power.
If we don't have any friends left on the surface, then we need to find an enemy.
But Cortex needs 25 of these crystals to power up his own Cortex Vortex, not just one. That means 25 levels. Meanwhile, Crash and his sister Coco are living on Insanity, an island Cortex used to own.
Crash, my battery is fried. Make yourself useful, big brother, and bring an extra battery for me.
While we try to get that battery, he gets teleported into Cortex's headquarters.
Surrounding you are a series of 5 doors. Through each door lies a well-hidden crystal. The crystals look like this. Bring me the crystals, Crash.
So Cortex convinces Crash that an unspeakable force will destroy Earth if these purple crystals weren't picked up. As Crash collected those purple crystals, Cortex would check your progress, and every once in a while, Coco would interrupt the signal just to scold at Crash for helping him.
You have to be careful. Trusting Cortex seems a little unwise.
And discover his true intentions. It seems very unclimactic picking up these crystals for Cortex knowing immediately at the beginning what he's actually going to use them for. It would have been better if it showed him falling, then cutting to Crash and Coco on Insanity Island. In short, cut everything in the beginning with Cortex in it. While Crash might not know Cortex's true intentions, make it so that the gamer doesn't, at least for a little bit. And change the title while you're at it, or just call it Crash Bandicoot 2 only. Speaking of Cortex, because he has a lot more dialogue, it needed the right voice actor. And they got it, with Captain Hadley and Mr. Krabs himself, Clancy Brown.
Be wary of the pathways between warp ruins. Remember, I'm counting on you.
As you can tell, Torna is never seen or mentioned once. Sony and Universal have a lot to do with that. After Naughty Dog were forced to redesign her look, they decided to scrap the character altogether and replace her with a sister named Coco. I wish she had her own levels because I like her. Or maybe it's just because I've played Warp so much I just assumed she would be in some ways the star of the game. As is with the predecessor, it once again has that jungle feel to most of the game with the soundtrack, level designs, enemies, and even our heroes. But because Crash is now teleporting through different areas, sometimes you get snow, sewers, and even Cortex's base. Thanks to a new game engine, the polygon count is increased, textures look more detailed, and there's no fog like you get in most Nintendo 64 games. The only reason I'm pointing that out is because they were originally meant to have fog on some of the jungle levels, but because fog was common in most 3D games at the time, critics pointed that out as a trick to hide dodgy polygon textures and were noble enough to abandon the idea. In short, despite the new warp zone, Crash Bandicoot 2 doesn't really increase the diversity, but then it doesn't need to, and it looks polished enough for you to not care. With most PlayStation 1 games really showing its age, thanks to fantastic art direction, this, on the other hand, looks great today, which is a really impressive thing to do now. But how does the gameplay hold up? This is where the core of the review lies, and it's what ruins the predecessor today. Well, like the first game, it's an on-rail 3D platformer with barely any free roam, but it's like that to make the levels more detailed and is now considered a staple in the series, so that's okay. Instead of a level selection you'd expect from Donkey Kong Country, Crash is now in a warp room where you're given 5 levels to choose from, and in order to move on to the next set of levels, you have to collect the purple crystals on each one as ordered by Cortex. and defeat a boss. They have gotten a little bit harder, at least to the point where you'll lose a couple of lives working out their patterns, but expect a work rate of about 40% from these guys. It can still be frustrating jumping from one box to the other like so. Another reason why analog controls should be an option. According to the back of the game's cover, it is. But if you download it off the PlayStation Store, it isn't. I don't know why, maybe they just forgot about it. Every other PlayStation 1 game that allows analog controls work on the PlayStation 3. But how can you do worse? With this jetpack. Anyone who's played the last few levels for the first time knows exactly what I'm talking about. Firstly, to move up and down, you use the D-pad, and on top of that, it's inverted. That on its own means the challenge isn't on the level designs or tough enemies, but this stupid jetpack. Did I mention it's on the final boss? Move forwards, backwards, left and right with the D-pad, and use X and circle to move up and down. There, you fixed it. Okay, all things considered and not being able to use the analog sticks, it controls a lot better than the first game. I like the extra gameplay variety even if there's not much of it. Instead of riding a hog and being chased by boulders, Crash is now riding a polar bear on the ice, being chased by boulders and even bigger polar bears, boost boarding through a river, and flying through a space station with a jetpack. There are so many little improvements like the camera moving in more than one direction. Crash stops whenever you let go of the D-pad regardless of whether you're attacking or not, unlike the predecessor, and he has a couple new tricks up his sleeve. Or pants, or shoes. These include the body slam, which is perfect for crates surrounded with metal, and the slide tackle useful for attacking specific enemies, and crates in tight spaces. Also, if you hit the jump button at the correct time, you can jump higher and further. Going back to the back cover, it brags about the cool new moves Crash can now do. Speaking of new features, there are also ones designed to make your life that little bit harder. Step right up, the Nitro Crate, where a single touch equals instant death. Cheers, Cortex. And yes, they are also part of the crate count in the level in order to collect a gem, which we'll get to. That's what the green exclamation point is for. The crates once again provide the same purpose. They range from Wumpa Fruit, Lives, TNT, Nitro, exclamation boxes to spawn more crates, Aku which gives you a hit point, 3 of them make Crash briefly invincible, and there are bonus stages that can be accessed halfway through a level without any Tauna tokens required. Thanks to tighter controls and being able to save at any time, it's the last few levels that will really drain your life count. Again, gems can also be earned for smashing every crate on a level, but the big relief is if you smash a checkpoint crate and lose a life, you don't lose your progress, unlike the predecessor. So Naughty Dog must have thought, how can we still make it equally frustrating? By fooling noobs into thinking they got every crate, but really didn't. Yeah, in some cases, in order to find all the crates, you have to take action in places you never imagined trying through common sense. Like, how was I supposed to know that landing on top of these Nitro crates, going back to Polar on the end of level 15, or killing this particular plant, led to a secret area? If you've learnt these Nitro crates, for example, equal instant death, your instinct is to avoid them, not deliberately land on a huge pile to be transferred to another area to smash more crates. I know these are meant to be secrets, but kids must have been really bored in the late 90s. This also pertains to the color gems which were introduced here. Information on how to obtain them would be nice, thanks. The only thing that is self-explanatory is the Skull and Bone stage, which you can only access on a couple of levels if you reach that far without losing a life. Now, I think it's a great idea having an option to collect extras as opposed to just beating a level, because it increases the replayability, especially when you consider there are only 25 levels you can beat in about 4 or 5 hours total. But there's a line between secretive and just being flat out cryptic, and some gems require you to backtrack, which doesn't exactly help if the camera stays in front of you no matter what direction Crash is going. There's no way Gavin and Ruben did this on purpose. Was it too much to swap the camera in the opposite direction? But whatever way you put it, you have to get over it. It's the only way to get the real ending. Brio also briefly interrupted Cortex by saying that getting every gem is the proper way to defeat the true threat. Simply getting every crystal allows Cortex to have the power he wants. Defeating him doesn't mean it's over. Sure, he gets sucked into the vortex, but the gems will give Brio the power to fire a huge laser and destroy Cortex's space station. Turns out, Crash is the one that strikes back. This is a perfect example of a game that's easy to get into and borderline impossible to master. It might be a little rough around the edges, but this one has aged more gracefully compared to the predecessor, and definitely belongs in your PlayStation collection, either physical copy or digital. Crash Bandicoot 2 Cortex Strikes Back gets a 7.5 out of 10. It's much more playable, better to look at, and there's more to do, if you can work it out. Naughty Dog would capitalize on the success of Crash Bandicoot, with the sequel selling over 7 million copies, and gave Universal Interactive another green light for a sequel, which is a review for another day.